Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. This is Season 10, Episode 6. I was very fortunate to get a chance to talk to Susan Gravely about her brand new book, Italy on a Plate, and her company, VIETRI, who makes beautiful imported Italian porcelains. Italy on a Plate is a wonderful book in that it is a part travelogue, part history of Susan Gravely's family and life, as well as the beautiful ceramic work of Italy and the food of Italy as well, which it features. So it's one part travelogue, one part memoir, and one part wonderful, wonderful cookbook. And it's got some beautiful, gorgeous, authentic Italian dishes in it. I really urge you to check this book out. You won't be sorry, just because it's a beautiful book all the way through, and it's so multifaceted. Her loving memoir of her family is just really wonderful to read, and I really enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking to Susan. I'm going to take you right to my conversation with Susan Gravely. We're going to have links to the book, Italy on a Plate, in the bio, so if you want to get that, it is out today. Today is its debut, and you won't be sorry if you do. It's a really great book. Here we go. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones, and today I'm very honored to have on the podcast Susan Gravely, who is the founder and creative director of VIETRI Incorporated, a lifestyle brand offering Italian-inspired and artisan-crafted dinnerware and home and garden accessories. Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Dean. I'm so honored to be with you today.
I love doing research on you and your family, and I want to ask you if you can talk about your early years and where you're from.
Well, I'm from Eastern North Carolina, a town that was about 50,000 people when I grew up, called Rocky Mount. It was a town where wherever you went when you were playing as a child, the parents were able to pat you on the back and tell you were great, and also scold you and send you home. So I grew up lots and lots of parents. My father was in international tobacco, so we had foreigners in our home always. So our world was a bit larger than this small community where we lived.
Was food an essential part of your upbringing?
You know, we were Southerners, so it was fried chicken and corn on the cob and homemade milk cake with chocolate icing, chicken and dumplings, waffle and hash, pork chops, turnip greens, biscuits, and white bread, banana sandwiches. So yes, we food, being at home, there weren't many restaurants, so we ate at home most of the time, and we always sat around the table when we ate. We didn't use trays. It was always about the table and conversation and good food.
Travel was an important part of your life. Can you tell us about your first trip to Italy and what the impressions on you were?
Yes. Traveling to Italy came late in my life. I had been lucky in high school to, work at Aunt Sarah's Pancake House and raise money that my grandmother matched to go to South America to visit a friend. I'd chosen to go to Asia after college. I think going to Italy, somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew it was going to have a huge impact on my life. So it came as an invitation from my mother. My father had sold his tobacco company and unfortunately had died of a heart attack soon after, very young at 60. And 2 years later, Mama invited my sister and me to join her on the trip she and Daddy had chosen and planned. And from that trip to the rest of her life, if Mama invited us anywhere, we stopped everything and went, because her attitude was, if you didn't travel better than you lived at home, why travel? So off we went to Italy. And from the moment I arrived and smelled the cypress trees and the umbrella pines and the smells of fresh food and the smiles and warmth and then the Renaissance influences and the sea. I knew that that was going to be part of my life. I didn't know what, but I knew it was going to be part of my life.
This year will mark your company VIETRI's 40th anniversary. You and your sister Frances and your mother Lee founded VIETRI in 1983 after a family trip to Italy. Can you tell us about the magic moment when you decided to create the company?
Yes, it was magical, Dean. It was very serendipity. We flew over. We went to Rome, and then we went down to the Amalfi Coast and stayed at San Pietro, and stayed there because Mama had cut out of Bon Appetit or Gourmet in 1979 an article about this beautiful hotel. Well, we took the elevator down through the mountain to the foyer and living area, and there was these dark tiles and the arched cutout ceilings and white covered cotton damask sofas and chairs, and overlooking the sea. The next room was the dining room, and you can imagine peach colored tablecloths with this mixture of ceramic plates that had fruits and vegetables and fish and octopi and all sorts of different things on them with different color backgrounds. And being a family that we love to set a table and love to eat at a table, we just were mesmerized. So we ended up hiring a driver who spoke English, who was Italian, who took us to the factory for us to buy for ourselves. And within the next 48 to 72 hours, we went from, gosh, we should buy for ourselves, we should buy for all of our friends and family, to having drinks with a couple from New York, the Carps, who were in clothing manufacturing. And he looked at Frances and me and said, you two clearly could design and build something really magical. You should not retail, you should open and be a wholesale distributor. So that was the moment. We didn't know what that meant. We didn't know how to do it, except we knew tobacco could go across the ocean. So we knew that we could start a company and build it. We just didn't know how. And that was the moment. Over drinks before dinner, the third night.
The impression that and the dinnerware had on you and your family that inspired you to create the company?
It was that there would be 4 different plates on a table or 8 different plates, and they all worked together, but they were all different. Everything was geared towards nature. Everything was geared towards the Amalfi Coast. The colors were the terracottas and the blues and the yellows and the oranges and the greens. And the entire look just evoked warmth, a desire to be at that table, and interesting conversation, because everything was so different. And for us, that was it. That was how we kind of were brought up, and having dinner or being together and eating always evoked conversation. And my mother had a lot of dinnerware because of all the foreigners that would be in their home. So it just was that magical moment of a combination of our senses that said, this is something we had to have.
Your family is so amazing, and all the women in your family are so incredible. There could be a documentary just really talking about it in depth. It'd probably be 3 or 4 hours long.
Oh, well, there's nothing I have loved. I grew up as a Southerner, and I had a strong Southern mother and grandmother and great grandmother, and had a father that traveled, and a zillion parents, because we lived in a small town. So I had a great upbringing, I must say. Tough, strict, manners were key. And sitting around the table was absolutely part of our weekends, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
That sounds wonderful. I really loved you describing your father as well. He sounded like such a neat individual.
He was. He was he was very handsome and very charismatic. His father was a senator, and a story I didn't put in the book, but I always think about, I don't know why I think about this, is when my parents got married, my grandfather was running for senator again. And so that, it was the years of the receiving lines, and these people would come by, and my grandfather would say, and this is so-and-so, the next senator from so-and-so. And my father would look and say, and this is my wife, Lee Gravely. And I just thought that was so typical of him that, he had married the person he wanted to marry, and this was his time. And it was those people meeting my mother, Lee. My parents had the same name, Lee and Lee Gravely, of all things. And, growing up, the phone would ring and it would be for she Lee or he Lee. But he was a man's man, loved to hunt and fish, but he loved to dance and loved to travel the world. And Mama, he would invite her, and we'd have, babysitters for every 2 weeks. And some were great and some weren't. So our next door neighbor would come, and especially with my older sister, make sure that whoever was staying with us was not being too strict on her, because she was more the wild woman. But, they would travel, and then we'd have lots and lots of foreigners in our home. So being around a table, eating, enjoying the stories of the world, and having that glow where we'd look and say, okay, this is Zimbabwe, or this is Saudi Arabia, China, or Italy, and here's Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And it was always, you're just not that far away. Go travel, you're a phone call away, call us anytime. So travel and being together with people we didn't know, and hearing those stories and eating food that was different. And when we traveled, just was something that we enjoyed and we weren't afraid of.
Company has been featured in more than 2,000 retailers. You have been featured in such magazines as House Beautiful, Oprah, Elle, Coastal Living, and more. After all these years, how does it feel for your work to be so highly regarded?
How does it feel? It feels joyous. It's exciting. I'm humbled at times, but more than humbled, I'm just really, really happy that people feel a connection to what we do. It could be a connection because they love Italy, they've been to Italy, or they dream of going to Italy. It could be a connection to a table and mixing and matching dinnerware and new things with the old things they have. It could be the whimsy of it. But for me, having this company was never about being the biggest. It was always being the best. And the best meant that people felt joy in some way when they had VIETRI and they used VIETRI, and that it would create some kind of story for themselves. So it's just a wonderful feeling. It's just a wonderful feeling.
As of this publication date of this podcast, your book's going to be out, and it's the book Italy on a Plate: Travels, Memories, Menus. This book is a fabulous work with some stunning photographs and excellent writing about your life.
Well, I hope you like the book.
I loved it.
Good. That makes me feel great.
I loved reading it, and I loved looking at it. It's one of those things that it's a feast for the eyes.
We had so much fun. We had these lovely young Italian women who were photographing it, and they got it. They knew exactly the feeling. They had read every chapter, they thought through it, and it was the easiest thing in the world. It was wonderful.
I mean, it's just so wonderful to see the history and see your life in the photos, and to see all the beautiful, just the settings and the beautiful pottery in China, and just it's just so beautiful getting to see all of it.
Well, thank you, Dean. Thank you. I have had well, it's not had. I really love what I do, and I've met a lot of great people. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, I imagine what you must thought of when you got to see the book for the first time. It must have been a real joy.
Oh my gosh, Dean, I couldn't believe it. I mean, the whole kind of conception of the book was fun, and as a matter of fact, it was pretty easy, even though I'd never written a book like this, because it seemed to flow so naturally. But then when when our senior graphic designer did all the pictures and we saw it, I didn't cry, but I felt like crying.
When did you begin to write this book?
I started writing it about a year before it's being published. I thought about it for a long time because I love to share stories, funny stories of experiences during these 40 years. And I had a lot of friends and a lot of colleagues who would say, you need to write a book, you need to write a book. But when I started, it was because my young team knew we were heading towards 40 years, and it was time to do it. So it took about a year to write.
The book is a mixture of different things. It is a cookbook, but it also has a biography about your life, and it has visual, stunning photographs of food and also the ceramics of your company. How did you conceptualize this when you were writing it?
Dean, that's another great question. I started with thinking about what were the major, or what were some of the impactful moments, people, places during these 40 years. So I made a list of those. And I then started writing notes about each one of them. And I then kind of narrowed it down to these 8 chapters. And with that, and discussing it with our team, I first wrote about them, and I asked each of them if I could write about them, and told them about this idea of a book. And they laughed and said, can we read it? And I said, no, you cannot read it. I'm going to write. I'll let you read it once it's finished. They said, fine. And then with that, it kept coming back to food. It kept coming back to what ties you to anyone. And we're all looking for people to enjoy and to walk away from and think that was just really interesting. So I asked them for their own family recipes, things that they love to cook that were common for their part of the world. So we received a lot of recipes, and then I was there, and we hired these 2 wonderful Italian gals who read every word of every chapter before they went with us to people's homes or their restaurants to take the photographs. So it evolved from a storytelling book to a cookbook, and then to almost a picture book. So that's kind of how it all happened. And then from there came this name, Italy on a Plate.
You have some beautiful recipes here that represent different regions of Italy. Was it difficult deciding which ones were going to go into the book?
Oh, let's see about that. It I discussed it with each of the people. So I knew that they were going to be a bit different according to where they were from. But yes, for some of them, there were so many great recipes that it got to a place where if one person had um, a crazy water fish recipe that was different or a pasta sauce, I would ask them for something else. But overall, each family had different specialties. So it ended up, I mean, I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna, but this book was one of those things that came together more easily than any of us ever dreamed.
There's such a beautiful array of recipes in here. I really was really wowed by it, and it's beautiful, authentic Italian cooking, but not just, it's just not just like, I hate the idea that we have in the West. When we think of Italian food, we always think of like, pasta, etc. But there's a lot of diversity here, and a lot of the recipes are very light, and
Yeah,
they're very vegetable forward. What do you think we get wrong in America about Italian food?
I think that we think of Italian food more in the pasta and the pizza realm than in the natural flavors and the natural cooking. The thing that I find over and over and over is depending upon where I am, they cook with what is fresh for that season and for that day. They always use the five main ingredients that are always olive oil, garlic, a little salt, tomato, and then it'll either be an herb or it will be the pasta or the vegetable that's in season. But I think that restaurants have a hard time in the United States changing their menus to be more seasonal, where in Italy, as you know, there's some restaurants that don't even have a menu. They just prepare that day for what is seasonal. So I think that's the biggest difference. They also in Italy they do eat lightly. Their portions are smaller and they never put but one thing on a plate. So if you're eating the vegetable, you eat it on a certain plate. Then the next course could be the meat. But they don't eat heavy bread before the meal and they don't eat appetizers before the meal. And I think it makes a big difference.
What I think I loved most about the recipes were that many of them were simple and something that any American can do without feeling too daunted by it, but they're still elegant and very beautiful at the same time. Was that part of the design of the book?
Yes, it was. But again, it was not something we made as one of our goals. It just happened that way because these are family recipes. These are
Yeah.
not restaurant recipes. And this is how they eat. They eat simply and they don't use sugar. They don't freeze things. They eat everything that's simple to make. They come home for lunch many times and it needs to be quick, delicious, and fresh.
Do you have any food writers that are some of your favorite food writers that you love to read that have inspired you?
Um, Jean, one that's totally unimagined is Frances Mays.
Oh
Frances
yeah.
Mays, Under the Tuscan Sun, is one of the best cooks I have ever been around. And she's now done a couple of cookbooks about sauces, and then another one that she's getting ready to, that's coming out that's about pasta. But when you go to her house, it's fresh cookies and it's fresh vegetables, and she creates her own ice cream. And I, every time I'm with her, I write down every ingredient of what she cooks, and she's a chapter in this cookbook. For you, I would say fix her things first. You'll just think you've died and gone to heaven. So I just, and her husband's a great cook. He's a poet, and he's always, when I see him, he's been so busy. What have you been doing? Well, I've really been cooking a lot. So she's one. My mother created for all of us a handwritten 3-spiral notebook of all the recipes that were her favorites and my grandmother and great grandmother's favorites. So I always go to that. I always go to the Joy of Cookbook. Joy of Cookie was my very first cookbook when I was working at 19 on Nantucket Island and had to cook for someone and had never really cooked before. And then, Ina Gardner because of her Southern ties, everything's easy. So I tend to go towards Italian, or I go towards just very simple recipes.
So I always like to ask my guests, what's next for you?
Oh, dang. Well, I don't plan to change much. I'm very lucky because VIETRI now, though I'm still the CEO and I love to work on design and trends, and I love to kind of mentor everyone. It's run by a group of young, passionate people in their 20s, 30s, one in his early 40s, so that runs really well, and I get to just mentor. I'll probably write another book. It could be anything from a leadership, building a business book for women or men and women. And it also could be, I'm thinking of another kind of cookbook inspired book. Maybe I was thinking maybe the name could be Italy in a Glass. And it could be about wines and aperitivos and finger foods, and
Ooh.
other families, and choose other situations and do something like that. So those are kind of where I'm heading right now.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. And I do love reading your writing, and I loved hearing about your family. So I really want to encourage people to go out and get this book. It's going to be available on the airing of this podcast, and we're going to have links to it in the bio. Susan, thank you for being on the podcast.
Well, I've loved it. And what a wonderful podcast. Thank you.
That was my conversation with Susan Gravely about her brand new book out today, Italy on a Plate. I highly recommend it, and we have links in the bio. It's also going to be available at all better bookstores as well. You can catch it there. Next week, I'll be talking with my friend Sarah Neidhart about her brand new book, 20 Acres. It is a brand new memoir of her family's life living off the land in rural Arkansas in the 1970s. And I had a really great time talking to Sarah and catching up, and I know that you're going to have a wonderful time listening to me talk about that book. Tune in next week for that conversation. Until next week, I hope you have a chance to cook some of the wonderful recipes that my guests have had that have been on the show. Until next week, keep on cooking.